Welcome to Daily Papers, the podcast where we break down one interesting research paper every day. You've probably heard the saying, the death of one is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic.
It's a chilling quote, but it points to a well-documented quirk of human psychology. We feel more and we're willing to do more for a single identifiable person with a story than for a huge, faceless group described by numbers, even if that group is suffering on a much larger scale.
Exactly. This is called the identifiable victim effect, and a new paper asks a really important question for our modern world. Do our AIs have this bias too? The paper is called Narrative Over Numbers, the Identifiable Victim Effect, and its amplification in large language models.
The researchers wanted to see if the AI models we're starting to use for everything, from writing emails to advising on complex decisions, have inherited this very human, very emotional, and sometimes irrational bias.
So how on earth do you test an AI for empathy? You can't exactly put it in an MRI machine.
Well, you do the next best thing. You give it a classic psychology experiment. The researchers took 16 of the top AI models from companies like Google, OpenAI, and Meta. They gave each AI a hypothetical $5 and a choice.
A choice between what?
In one scenario, the AI was told about a food shortage affecting millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a huge statistical problem. In the other scenario, it was told about Rokia, a 7-year-old girl from Mali who is desperately poor and faces starvation.
Ah, the statistic versus the story. So they just asked the AI, how much of your $5 would you donate to each cause?
That's the core of it. They ran this test over 50,000 times with all these different models. And the first big finding was, yes, AI absolutely shows the identifiable victim effect. They consistently allocated more money to Rokia than to the millions.
Okay, so the AIs have our biases. That's kind of what you'd expect, since they're trained on all our writing. But here's where it gets really interesting. The effect in the AIs wasn't just present, it was, on average, about twice as strong as the effect found in humans.
Twice as strong, so the AI is even more swayed by a single compelling story than we are. But why? The paper digs into that, and the answer is fascinating. It has to do with how we make these AIs safe and helpful.
You mean the alignment process, where developers use human feedback to train the AI to be less toxic and more cooperative?
Precisely. That process is called reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF. We reward the AI for sounding helpful, empathetic, and harmless. The paper found that the models that had undergone the most of this helpfulness training showed the most extreme bias. They call them hyper-empathetic.
So, in trying to make AI nice, we've accidentally trained it to be a real sucker for a sob story. We've amplified the bias.
We've amplified the bias, but it gets even stranger. The researchers then tried something that should have made the AIs more logical. They used a technique called a chain of thought prompting.
Which is basically just telling the AI, think step by step before you answer, right? The idea is to force it to reason instead of just jumping to a conclusion.
Exactly. You'd expect that to reduce the emotional bias, but it did the complete opposite. When the AI was told to think step by step, it nearly tripled the identifiable victim effect.
Wait, what? How does thinking make it more biased?
The AI doesn't use the thinking time to do cold, hard math. Instead, it seems to write a little story for itself, generating emotionally reinforcing justifications for why Rokia's situation is so compelling. It essentially talks itself into feeling even more sympathy. It's what the paper calls autoregressive emotional scaffolding.
That is an incredible and, frankly, a bit of a worrying result. So is there any way to get the AI to be rational about this?
The researchers found one way that worked and one way that spectacularly failed. First, the failure. They tried teaching the AI about the bias. They literally gave it a paragraph explaining the identifiable victim effect and how it can lead to unfair decisions.
And did that work?
Not at all. In fact, it made things worse. After being told about the bias, the AI didn't increase its donation to the statistical group. Instead, it decreased its donation to the statistical group, making the gap even wider. The researchers call this the bias blind spot. The AI knows about the bias on a factual level, but can't apply that knowledge to correct its own behavior.
Wow, okay, so what was the one thing that actually worked?
The only thing that reliably eliminated the bias was giving the AI a very specific kind of instruction. They had to use what they called a utilitarian chain of thought. They prompted it to think step by step about lives saved per dollar, marginal utility, and welfare maximization.
So you basically have to tell it, stop trying to be a nice, empathetic person and start being a cold, calculating utilitarian robot.
That's the gist of it. Unless you explicitly frame the task in terms of pure population-level cost effectiveness, the AI defaults to the highly biased, narrative-driven emotional response.
And this has huge implications. We're starting to imagine using AI for things like reviewing grant proposals, assisting in humanitarian triage, or even advising on charitable giving.
And this study shows that a standard, helpful AI in those roles might systematically over-allocate resources to the one compelling story it sees, at the expense of a much larger but less narrative-rich crisis. It's not just a cute quirk, it's a potential source of massive allocative injustice.
So the big takeaway is that these AI models haven't just learned the dictionary of human language, they've learned the deep-seated structure of our moral psychology, including its flaws.
And our attempts to make them more human-like and helpful can ironically make those flaws even worse. This paper is a powerful reminder that when we're designing AI systems for important decisions, we can't just hope they'll be rational. We have to be incredibly specific about what kind of reasoning we want them to use.
It's a case of narrative over numbers, not just for humans, but for our AI counterparts as well. A fascinating and vital piece of research.